the ability to have somebody who is kind of epitomizes what you think your country stands for. And it's a huge advantage if you have somebody who can be recognized as that, and not just in your country, but around the world.
There is a brutal war of legacy playing out inside the palace right now, and Princess Anne, the Iron Princess, is winning it. She just drew a hard line directly at Kamilla and looked her dead in the eye with one cold warning. Do not mess with the late Queen's legacy. Behind the scenes, Kamilla had been doing something deeply ugly to Queen Elizabeth's memory. Quietly, deliberately, piece by piece. Anne caught every single move before it could go too far and shut it down completely. What happened next is not what anyone inside those walls imagined, and Kamilla never saw it coming. The woman who dared touch Elizabeth's crown. The first time Princess Anne left Kamilla completely embarrassed happened in a room full of royals. Everyone was dressed perfectly and smiling. It was King Charles's coronation dinner, the kind of night where everything was supposed to feel warm and historic and right. And then Princess Anne opened her mouth. She looked directly at Kamilla, not around her, not past her, directly at her. And in a voice that cut clean through the noise of that room, Anne said it out loud where people could hear it. She said, "You're not queen, you're the queen's consort." The room immediately went quiet. Camilla's eyes dropped straight to the floor. Her mouth opened like she was about to say something back, but her lips trembled and nothing came out. Then she forced a smile, the tight kind that does not reach the eyes, and quickly walked away. And here is the thing. Anne had not snapped suddenly. She had been quietly seething the entire evening. All night she had watched Kamilla carry herself through that room like she had already rewritten history. And at some point earlier that same night, Anne had heard it herself, heard Kamilla correct someone who referred to her as queen consort. Kamilla had looked at that person and said no, she was queen, not queen consort. Queen. That was the moment Anne's patience ran out completely. What Anne had just done was not a slip. Anne is one of the most protocol-precise people on the planet. She has attended over 20,000 official events. She does not make mistakes with titles. What she said that night was deliberate, and it landed exactly where she aimed it. Kamilla brought this upon herself because she had just done something very terrible. You see, when Queen Elizabeth was still alive, she made a public statement in 2022 during her Platinum Jubilee. She said she wanted Kamilla to be known as Queen Consort when Charles became king. That word, consort, was Elizabeth's boundary. It meant Kamilla would hold an honorary title, a supportive title. It meant she would stand beside Charles, not above or equal to Elizabeth's legacy. That instruction lasted about as long as it took for Elizabeth to be buried. During the coronation planning, the word consort was quietly dropped. Kamilla was crowned simply as queen, and Charles allowed it, which means in the weeks and months after the most beloved monarch in British history died, the woman who helped destroy her son's first marriage overrode the dead queen's own words and upgraded her own title. She did it silently. She did it efficiently, and she did it while the entire country was still in mourning. Anne watched every second of it, and she said nothing publicly. She smiled at events. She gave interviews where she praised Kamilla's support of Charles. She was strategic and patient, just like the typical Anne. But at that coronation dinner, surrounded by the people who had watched it all happen, she finally let one sentence escape, and that one sentence told the whole story. But here is what makes this even darker. The confrontation at that dinner was not the first time Anne had drawn a line in public. It was not even close to the first time, because Elizabeth herself had drawn that line years earlier, and Anne had been carrying it ever since. Go back to 2005. Charles and Kamilla had just married. The ink was barely dry on the wedding certificate when Princess Anne and Princess Alexandra went privately to the Queen with a request. They did not want to curtsy to Kamilla, ever. And Elizabeth, the most powerful woman in Britain, said yes. She had her private secretary create a formal document stating that Anne would never be required to bow to Kamilla. Think about what that actually means. The Queen of England put it in writing that her own daughter would never have to show respect to this woman. That was not a small concession. That was Elizabeth herself saying, with a pen and a signature, exactly what she thought Kamilla deserved. Anne had been carrying that document like a weapon for nearly 20 years, and Kamilla had known about it the entire time. So when the coronation title change happened, when Kamilla quietly erased the word consort from her own crown, Anne was not surprised. She was ready. And the dinner confrontation was just the first move. After the coronation, something quieter and more calculated began to happen inside the palace. Kamilla started moving toward Queen Elizabeth's charitable empire, not with grief, not with reverence, with appetite. She began attaching herself to institutions that the British public still emotionally connected to Elizabeth, organizations that had carried Elizabeth's name for decades. And what institutions are those? The Royal Voluntary Service, which Elizabeth had supported for over 40 years. Barnardo's, the children's charity Elizabeth had personally championed. The Royal College of Music, where Elizabeth had been patron for 7 decades. These were places where the public still felt Elizabeth's presence so deeply that just walking into them felt like walking into her memory. And Kamilla wanted all of it. But this was not about honoring Elizabeth, not even close. The people watching from inside the palace saw exactly what this was. Kamilla had spent years feeling dismissed, feeling like the public never fully accepted her, feeling like no matter what she did, Elizabeth's shadow was always bigger, always warmer, always more loved. And now Elizabeth was gone, and Kamilla saw a gap. She moved toward those institutions the way someone moves toward a throne that has just been left empty. She was not trying to continue Elizabeth's legacy. She was trying to replace it with her own name attached. She was trying to reap where she did not sow. And this was not the first time. Because here is what the cameras never captured, and the headlines never quite said. Kamilla had done this exact same thing before. Anne and Kamilla had a history that went back further and cut deeper than most people knew. Before Kamilla married Andrew Parker Bowles and Anne had a real and serious connection, and Kamilla knew about it. She knew Anne was there. She knew what that connection meant, and she pursued Parker Bowles anyway. She looked at something that belonged in someone else's life and decided she wanted it more, and she took it, just like she always takes things. When someone asked Kamilla about the competition back then, she smiled and said, "May the best woman win." She smiled with complete and total certainty that she was the best woman. That incident was never addressed again, never apologized for. Kamilla walked into rooms and smiled at Anne across decades of royal events and never once acknowledged what she had taken. And now here she was, doing the same thing again, reaching, taking, absorbing what belonged to the queen. So Anne made her move. It was time to stop Kamilla. It started at the University of London in November 2024. Anne and Kamilla were there together for an official event, and then Kamilla did something that made people in that room look twice. She gestured for Anne to walk into a room ahead of her, like she was being kind, like she was being gracious, like she was the bigger person. But here is the problem with that. In royal protocol, the queen walks first, always. That is not a suggestion, that is the rule. Kamilla outranked Anne, and every single person in that room knew it. So Kamilla was not being gracious. She was putting on a show. She was performing kindness in front of an audience while breaking the very rules she had fought so hard to be entitled to. The same woman who had once corrected someone for calling her a queen consort instead of queen was now pretending she did not care about rank at all. That is not warmth. That is hypocrisy with a smile on its face. And Anne saw straight through it. She looked at Kamilla, and she did not move. She stood exactly where she was and refused the gesture completely. No thank you, no polite stepping forward, nothing. The moment lasted only a few seconds. But the people in that room felt every one of them. Anne was not going to let Kamilla play both sides. She was not going to let her demand a queen's title with one breath and perform a saint's humility with the next. That game was over. That was November. By the time the 2024 Commonwealth Day service arrived, Anne was ready to give more than a silent treatment. That day, every senior royal in that room greeted Kamilla with a kiss and a curtsy. That is the rule. You greet the queen with physical deference. Anne walked up to Kamilla, kissed her on the cheek, and walked away. In a room built entirely on protocol, Anne's refusal hit like a door being slammed. She was not saying she had forgotten the rules. She was saying she had chosen not to follow them. Not with Kamilla. Not that day. Not anymore. Then came the charities. And this is where Anne completely destroyed Camilla's plan. Camilla's entire strategy depended on one thing. If she could attach her name to enough of Elizabeth's organizations, the public would eventually stop thinking of those institutions as Elizabeth's and start thinking of them as Camilla's. That was the goal. That was what all the quiet stepping in and rebranding was building toward. She wanted to own Elizabeth's legacy by simply occupying it long enough. Anne shut that down completely. She moved through Elizabeth's charitable empire like she was locking every door before Camilla could reach it. She absorbed over 300 organizations. She personally took on Friends of the Elderly, a role Elizabeth had held for over 60 years, and made it hers without a single day's gap. Then she held a forum at Buckingham Palace on her 75th birthday, where nearly 200 representatives from over 100 organizations gathered inside the palace under Anne's name. Not Camilla's name, Anne's. It was described publicly as a birthday celebration. It was not. It was Anne standing in the middle of everything Elizabeth had built and making it impossible for Camilla to walk in after her. Every organization Anne touched was one less foothold for Camilla. Every room Anne filled was a room Camilla could never claim. Anne did not just block Camilla. She buried the path completely. And here is what made it so devastating for Camilla. She could not fight back publicly. She could not accuse Anne of anything, because Anne had not done anything wrong. She had simply shown up and worked, the way she has always shown up and worked for 57 years. Every move Anne made was clean. Every move was defensible. And every move left Camilla with less ground to stand on. But what Camilla did next was not nothing. Camilla keeps score. The people who know her well describe a woman who stores humiliations the way other people store memories, pressing them flat and cold and saving them for later. She has deep relationships with the most powerful tabloid editors in Britain. She has used those relationships before. The softening of her public image did not happen by accident. The stories that made her seem warm and funny and relatable were not organic. They were placed. And the people who understand how British royal media operates know that Camilla has always had access to channels that could burn someone if she chose to use them. She had not chosen yet, but she is watching, and she is storing everything, and Charles watched all of it. His wife was corrected at a dinner table by his own sister. His wife was blocked from charities by the same woman. His wife was publicly uncurtsied in front of the world, and Charles said nothing. Because Charles has always been afraid of Anne in the specific way that people are afraid of someone who is morally right. Anne covered for him during the Diana years. She held the family line when it was falling apart. He owes her debts he can never repay. So he watched. He said nothing. And Camilla looked at his silence and understood exactly what it meant. But Anne was not just fighting to stop Camilla. She was fighting to give something to someone else entirely. And the person she had chosen to receive it had no idea how much was already being built for her. The crowning of Catherine. While Camilla was being blocked on one side, something quieter and more extraordinary was happening on the other. Anne was not just tearing down, she was building up. And the woman she was building up for was Catherine, Princess of Wales. This alliance was never announced. There was no meeting, no conversation anyone has reported where Anne looked at Catherine and said, "I am choosing you." Instead, it moved the way the most powerful things inside the palace always move. Through actions, through presence. Anne began absorbing Elizabeth's charities and then routing them toward the future Catherine would one day inherit. She took on the patronages. She kept the organizations funded, visible, and connected to the crown. And she made sure that the next natural heir to that charitable empire was someone who had already proven she understood what it cost, because Catherine had paid a price that most people in that family had never been asked to pay. She had faced a cancer diagnosis that shook the entire country. She had disappeared from public view for months, while her body was being put back together from the inside. And then she came back. She came back with the kind of focus that only comes from someone who has looked at the possibility of not being here anymore and decided that every single day of public service after that would mean something real. Anne recognized that. She had spent 57 years showing up when it was hard and unglamorous and completely thankless. She had built the standard, and she saw in Catherine the one person in the next generation of that family who understood it from the inside. Catherine's work is not decorative. She has built a business task force with companies like Lego and Deloitte to fund early childhood development programs across Britain. She became patron of the Royal Marsden Hospital. She took on Tai Hafan, a children's hospice in Wales. These were not photo opportunities. These are long commitments to hard, unglamorous, deeply human work. Exactly the kind of work Elizabeth had done. Exactly the kind of work Anne had done. And nothing like the kind of work Camilla had positioned herself around. And so Anne made her choice, with action after action after action that drew a single invisible line from Elizabeth, through herself and directly to Catherine. Here is where Anne's own words become the sharpest weapon in this entire story. In a 2023 BBC documentary, Anne was asked directly about Camilla, and she answered. She said she had known Camilla a long time, and that Camilla's understanding of her role and how much difference it makes to the king has been absolutely outstanding. Anne did not say Camilla was outstanding for Britain. She did not say Camilla was outstanding for the monarchy. She said Camilla was outstanding at supporting the king. That single framing is not an accident. Anne was telling anyone paying close enough attention exactly what she believed Camilla's ceiling was. A good wife, a supportive consort, nothing more. The legacy of a 70-year reign did not belong to a woman whose greatest achievement, in Anne's own carefully chosen words, was being useful to her husband. Catherine understood what was being transferred to her, and she carried it accordingly. The BBC found this out the hard way. In November 2025, they were forced to issue a public apology after receiving complaints for repeatedly failing to use Catherine's correct name and title. They had been calling her Kate, casually, repeatedly, as though her title was optional, and the complaints came hard enough and loud enough that the BBC had no choice but to correct itself on air. That correction had Anne's fingerprints all over it, because the people who pushed back understood exactly what was at stake in something as seemingly small as a name. Catherine is not Kate. She is the Princess of Wales. She is the future queen, and she carries a line of legacy that runs back to Elizabeth's coronation in 1953. Here is what all of this means for the power inside that palace going forward. Camilla is queen right now. Her title is real, and her position is legal, but a title without moral authority is just a word, and the moral authority of Elizabeth's legacy was never Camilla's to claim. It was earned over 70 years by a woman whose shoes Camilla could not fill. Anne knew that, and Anne made sure that by the time the question of legacy became unavoidable, the answer would already be written. When Charles dies, Camilla's title largely disappears. She becomes a dowager, a word that means she once was something. There is no platform in that, no power, no continuation. Everything she tries to absorb from Elizabeth will be left sitting in a house she may not even be welcome to stay in, depending on what William decides. And Catherine will already be holding everything Anne built for her, not because she grabbed it, because she earned it, and because the most precise, most unforgiving, most relentless woman in the British royal family spent the last years of her public life making absolutely sure of it. The crown sits on Camilla's head today, but the legacy was never hers. Anne made certain of that, and Catherine is already carrying it, one engagement at a time, exactly the way Elizabeth would have wanted.